Hi, everyone. Welcome to Healing Together, the podcast. I am your host, Mandy McGee, and as a disclaimer, this podcast is not a substitute for therapy. I will be having on survivors of trauma who will discuss their story with me and their healing journey. This first episode will be my story. I tried to make it as short and concise as possible, so I don't go into great detail, but I do welcome all questions about my trauma and my healing journey. Over the episodes, I will go into more detail about some of that and my PTSD. So, without further ado, here's my story, which will be hosted by my friend Salty, and she will also be in a future episode. Thank you for watching, and please come back next week. My name is Mandy McGee, and I will be your host along this trauma journey of healing together.
Yes, and I'm Crystal. Well, no, just kidding. Minus. I'm Salty. I'm Salty, and I have the privilege and the honor to actually interview you today. Although you are the
Yes.
host for the whole entire podcast, but today I get to sit in this spot and interview you.
Yep. So we're going to have a conversation detailing my personal trauma to get this ball rolling. And
Yeah, awesome.
so what I think I want to start with is just the fact that I have been dealing with complex PTSD for most of my life. Didn't even really know what PTSD was until I became an adult. And I didn't really start on my healing journey until I reached my 30s, like late 30s was
Wow.
when I started um, learning more about why I have certain PTSD symptoms, what my triggers are, and I'm still learning. Just like I think it's going to be a lifetime long thing. I think anybody who has trauma, you're constantly going to be learning and growing and healing from it. Um,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, is that why you wanted to start the podcast to kind of like um, help others like see that they're not alone?
yeah, exactly. I really wanted to take more of a conversational approach and just um, talk about how each individual person deals with their own trauma and how we can learn and grow from each other in the healing process.
Yeah. And I personally have like a lot of trauma just like growing up in Korea. But like I wanted to also hear about like your experience and like what you've been through. I know you mentioned that like you didn't even know what PTSD was. I feel like that was very common like in our sort of age group that like there was less awareness about mental health.
Yeah.
And what was that like for you growing up?
Well, also, I'd like to preface this saying that I am an autistic individual, and I didn't even know I was autistic until I turned 40. Um, and so, being autistic and undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, you will have trauma somewhere because society doesn't like the behaviors of an autistic person and they try and um, fix you or control your behaviors to fit in with what they think society is supposed to be like. And so I don't really blame my family too much for not knowing that I was autistic, but even if I wasn't, the amount of trauma that they inflicted upon me was a little much, you know. I'm sugarcoating it a little bit. Um, as far as like my trauma timeline, lots of things added up to the ball of mess that's in my head now. And so I grew up with my grandparents, my mom's parents. My mom and dad were not very good parents. My mom was a drug addict since 16, and my dad was an alcoholic. I don't know when he started drinking, probably pretty young too. Um, So I grew up with my grandparents and my uncle, who was only 10 years older than me, so my mom's younger brother. And so just, having parents that are addicts that are like, um, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, the feelings that I got as a kid and the way that I look at it now is like, my mom was really consistent. Like, she was always kind of trying to be in my life, but she also was a drug addict. So I had to see all that. My dad, on the other hand, he decided to leave completely. Like, I did see him every once in a while and like he still like came around, but he apparently told my grandparents, which I didn't find this out until I was older, that he purposely didn't want to be around me because he didn't think he was a good role model. It's like, okay, so you chose drinking over being there for your
Child.
child. Like, okay, but it's weird because even though I saw like so much hard drugs and like awfulness with my mom, my dad was always loyal. Like when it came to me actually seeing him and going, hey, let's meet up on this day and hang out, he never missed a day. Never was late.
Mm,
Like always, like whenever he was never the one to come to me first. But if I saw him and was like, hey, I want to hang out, he would always come hang out with me. And he would be straight the whole time. He wouldn't be drinking. Now that would change when I
mhm,
got older, because I was
mhm.
older, and then he was like, "Well, you're an adult now, so you can see me drink." My mom tried to get me to smoke weed when I was 12.
Oh wow.
One time when I was younger, I think I was like 12 or 13, she decided after having heroin that she needed to come see me at 3 o'clock in the morning and flipped her car or her van or whatever she was driving at the time many, many times and ended up in the hospital. And I remember like this was the point where I was just like starting to see how damaged she really was. And
Mm,
everybody was like, you don't need to go to the hospital. You don't need to see her. And I was like, she needs to see me. She needs
yeah.
to be laying in that hospital bed in the condition she is and look at her child. And it's just like kind of weird that I was that young and I had that like, no, you're a fucking dickhead. Like, look what you just did to your own child by ending up in here. Like, what are you doing? So that's just like a brief overview of like my parents and my relationship with them. They both are no longer here. My mom did die of an overdose, which I was always kind of prepared for. She died in 2011. My dad died of COPD in 2017, 2 weeks before I was supposed to go see him, actually. So that was weird, whirlwind of things. So yeah, both my parents are no longer here. My grandfather's no longer here either. He was kind of like, he was very quiet and didn't do a lot to stop the abuse that was happening in my house. But he was also my savior at the same time, if that makes sense. Because whenever, like me and my grandmother would start to get combative, he would take me out of the house. He would just be like, let's go to the automotive store. Let's go do this. So he was taking me away from the abuse occasionally. But my grandmother was a very abusive person. She was very emotionally manipulative. She would always do the, well, of course I love you. I give you food in your belly and a roof over your head. And like that's supposed to solve everything.
Mhm.
And like I'm supposed to be fully grateful for that when you're going and like hitting me open palm slaps across the face backhand like throwing it when I got to be a teenager it started to be objects being thrown at me lots of like I think I got my anger a lot from her like I'm not an angry
Mm,
I'm an angry person but I don't lash out anymore and I think it's because I am so far removed from that environment.
mhm. Now, like you have different coping mechanisms and things like that. Like, how have you dealt with that childhood trauma?
I got a therapist a little over a decade ago, and it's the longest therapist I've ever had, and the only one that I've felt very comfortable with. And she really helped me become more aware of what's going on inside my head, why I have certain thoughts or impulsions, or why I would get angry. Because I think a lot of times one of the PTSD symptoms is, being irrationally angry about things, always being angry, but not really knowing exactly why. And,
Mhm.
my grandmother was also abused when she was younger. So I don't, she does not think that what she did to me was abuse because it wasn't as bad as she got. But she also grew up in a generation where you just hit kids. That's what you do to get them to
Mhm.
behave.
Comply.
But you shouldn't be throwing objects at children and making their nose bleed and emotionally
Yeah.
beating them up. And
In general, that's like a good rule of thumb is to not hit children and yeah, abuse them and make
yeah,
their nose bleed. Yeah, that's a. I would say that's probably a good sign of non-abuse if you're not doing that.
yeah. And so I'll
In some
spare
ways, I guess.
I'll spare a lot of like the really bad details of all that, but yeah, just abuse in general. It was mostly emotional. It was very like, and now that I know more about PTSD, I know why she acted in some of the ways that she did, and she never
Mhm.
like healed. She never went through a healing process. I mean, I know that when I was younger, she was going to a therapist, but she stopped and she's never gone back to a therapist. As of right now, like over the last couple of years or so, we've actually become closer because I purposely wanted to make our relationship better. I wanted her to
Mm,
understand how I felt as a child. What she did to me was wrong, but I also have told her that she didn't have a chance either because of what she went through. She was literally kicked out when she was 16 years old, so she was on her own at 16. So there was
well.
a generational trauma, generational abuse going on in my family. And at one point, I was just like, no, it ends with me. Like, fuck this. Like,
Mhm.
our family can't
Good for
keep doing
you.
this. Like, and I don't,
Right.
I don't want to, like, if I ever have children, I don't want to be causing them harm because of my own trauma. I have to keep my stuff in check because you will bleed all over everybody else. You will burn
Yeah.
bridges. You will, cause rifts in your relationships.
I think that's like a big point that like maybe a lot of people don't know either is like when you don't heal and you don't go through that healing journey, and like obviously heightened by generational trauma, like if you do not go through that process, like you do bleed over everything you touch, and that's like really like I think that only comes from like wisdom of you going through that healing journey, because without it you wouldn't have like known either.
Yeah. So when I was 5 years old, I be, wow. I talk about this a lot, and I don't know why I'm like starting to like sweat talking about it. So yeah, I started becoming molested when I was 5 years old. It was at my babysitter's house. Um, the man who did it was married to my babysitter's best friend. And I remember these things when I was 5 years old. Now, like full details are lost. You're 5, you're 6. I'm like 40, almost 42 now. Like a lot of those memories I will never get back. Um, don't know if I really need them back, but yeah, so that was a thing till I was 6 years old. And when I was going through my healing journey on that, I started talking to my grandmother, and this was like 3 or 4 years ago. I started talking to my
Mm,
grandmother more about it because anytime I would bring it up, she would just do the, well, what do you want to accomplish? Nothing can get done. Why don't you just forget about it? That was the whole thing in my family. Why worry about it? Let it go. Water under the bridge. It's like, well, if you just keep stuffing things under the carpet, it's gonna like pile up,
mhm.
you know? And so I was just like, okay, well, I guess I have to forget about this. But you can't because your body and your
Yeah.
brain remember these things. And so about 4 years ago, I told her more information that I had remembered that I had never told her. And I asked her if she remembered anything I said because she
Mm,
didn't know that this occurred at all. And then what she told me actually validated my memories. She was like, yeah, I don't know, like all of a sudden you started becoming a more unhappy being there. You'd come home angry, and then all of a sudden I was like crying every time I had to go there. And I was like, I really don't want to go back. Like I was telling her, "Hey, something is wrong here. Please don't put me back in that
mm-hmm.
house." And she didn't. She actually like listened to me, and she had to quit her job so she could stay home with me. But that hearing that validated all my feelings and my memories. So I was like, I did say something. I didn't have the language to be like, this specific thing is happening to me, but I at least let her know that, like, hey, this is a very unhappy place for me. And
Yeah.
I
That's like
got,
really hard to go through as like a kid, and like remembering that as an adult is like excruciating.
I
No, go
ended
ahead.
up in a hospital when I was 17 because my
Mm,
therapist that I had at the time, we were working through these nightmares I was having, and that's where I came to the conclusion of the abuse that had occurred, and I started remembering more things, and it was too much for me. And so I
mm,
flipped out and I ended up in a mental hospital. Honestly, hospitals, they didn't help me. Um, but that's like another conversation for another day. I have a whole rant on like hospitalization and how mental health is in this country. But yeah, so for me, this tanked my 11th grade year. I failed all of my exams. So I had to take summer school, and then my senior year was the worst year of my life. I got so depressed in my senior year that I almost barely graduated.
mm,
I like started skipping school way more, only going to the classes that I knew I needed to graduate, and like even skipping the ones that I liked, like drama. Not supposed to do
mm.
that, and now I know that like after I graduated, they started putting security guards in the senior parking lot to prevent people from leaving.
Oh wow. You're just like locked in at that point.
Yeah.
That's so wild. I didn't grow up in America, so I don't know about like all this driving to your home and such and so forth. And like I feel like weirdly like American high schools are very police. Like there are a lot of guards and stuff. And like that's such a weird concept to me because like I've never seen like a security guard even at my school.
Hmm.
And there were just like teachers and like a dare instructor or something like a counselor. Like there was no, like I mean, I did go to school on base, so like I guess like technically like I'm in a giant policed area, but
Yeah.
like I've never seen like military police or something like roll up unless there was like a bomb threat or something, which did happen and we got like SWAT and stuff, but like that was like a particular circumstance. But I feel like in America, to your point, it is heavily just it's like it's so policed and like I mean if you feel sick, like you gotta go home and I feel like hopefully now there's like a lot more mental health like programs and stuff where if you do feel down you can go home and take a mental health day and there's like a lot more leeway.
That's a nice hope. It doesn't exist.
Not yet.
I know, right? Um, so to quickly breeze through these other um, things that really fucked me up in terms of my sexuality and sex in general. There were other sexual assaults that happened to me. Will not go into detail, but another one was at age 13. Another one was with someone I was kind of dating, and it was at 19. And then another partner uh, when I was like 20, 21. And And the fucked up thing about that kind of trauma, especially when you're in a relationship and that trauma happens, when I was growing up, I did not know anything about rape. I mean, I did, but I always assumed it was a violent act by someone that you didn't know. I now know that that's not true. So when a partner was doing that to me, I was just like, well, I'm uncomfortable, but I didn't consider it as severe as it was. So that kind of like really fucked me up when I started realizing that. And this person was a very abusive person, and he was the first person to like really he controlled me. Basically, I had no friends left by the end of the relationship.
Mm,
Um, and
narcissistic.
yeah, and he constantly did the, well, if you leave me, I'm gonna kill myself type of thing. Um,
Mm.
he would always tell his friends that I was like, a bitch or, horrible. And he also cheated on me many times. But anyway, so that um,
That's horrible. I'm sorry you went through that.
it just really bothers me that America really wants to take sex education out of schools, especially when it comes to queerness, because like when I was younger, they barely touched the surface on that kind of stuff, but it was always like taught to us as like you are a straight person. This is how
Mm-hmm.
it goes.
100%.
Like there is no like this is how you date someone of the same sex. I don't know. Like I just wish there was more um guidance when it comes to that kind of thing instead of just
And it's
like
like,
shame.
yeah, and it's odd, right? Because like there is a lot of weirdly talks of relationships as like a heterosexual like couple. Like when
Mhm.
you're young. It's like weirdly like people are weirdly invested in like how you conduct business, like
Mhm.
quote unquote, together when like first off, if we're going to talk about sex education, it should be like strictly sex education and something I think in my opinion is like very like biological and like in that way also there are like protections and there's protections with like queer couples that you can use and all of these other things like self protection as well like if you're pleasuring yourself like there's so many like different ways of like being like sex positive and still being safe and yet America teaches hetero sex education in very limited ways that is like weirdly invested in like young people
Mhm.
um under 18 which makes me feel like ick and I feel like it's something like definitely like as a general society needs to like look at and like reevaluate what they're talking about because there's a lot of talks of like quote unquote queer grooming and all of these things when like I mean there are a
Yeah.
lot of like hetero grooming. Like there's a lot of like weird
Yeah.
things that happen in that world,
Like
and
when I was
that's
younger,
not talked about.
my best friend who I always suspected as gay, like I knew before he knew, um, his parents, my grandparents were always like, "Oh, they're best friends. They're so cute together. They're gonna get married." Blah blah blah. And even one Halloween, they had me dress up as a bride and him as my groom.
Weird,
And I'm just like, "Why are we
super
doing
weird.
this? This is so weird."
Yeah, super weird, right? Like it's super weird concepts. Like it's like why are we doing this to children? So yes, 100%. And I feel like I know you as a very aware human being. Like you're very human. You're very human. Well, you're very
I'm
human.
very
You're
human.
very oh, you're very human. You're very aware of like your surroundings. You're very aware of like social issues, and you're very aware and passionate about like things that happen around you as well. Like that doesn't maybe just like impact your life personally, but has impacts on like society as a whole.
Hmm.
And I think that like and I would love for you to like talk more about your healing journey because I think that is like very helpful for people to listen to you like
Hmm.
talk about that because not everybody has the access to like maybe therapy or like even friends or like a good group of
Exactly.
people that can talk to. But your healing journey actually has like brought you to be this person who is like very aware and want to do good. Because if not, you could have been you could have been a completely different person, but you've decided to like invest, take a moment, take a beat in your life and heal. So like I think that's like a really like great thing, and I'm sorry you had to go through all of those horrific things. I like cannot even imagine to my bone like as a young person like what that feels like. But I wanted to talk about like yeah, your healing journey. Like I know there's like a lot more. I feel like we need to do like a second episode on like the latter half of your life, because
I
we
know.
touched up to like from beginning to like your like 18, maybe 20, but like I feel like we need like a 20 to like 42. But for your healing journey particularly, I would love to hear like other than going to therapy, what other things did you do to like get to where you are now?
A lot of my healing really, I mean, it's been slow going, but I think a lot of it really started healing a little bit faster once I realized I was autistic. When I started researching more about autism in assigned female people, all of a sudden I started becoming aware of like why I do certain things and why I respond a certain way to things. Like I was told all the time growing up, you're too sensitive, you're too sensitive. Stop crying or I'm gonna give you something to cry about. I was constantly having meltdowns because I was constantly, even if my grandmother wasn't like yelling at me, or I was still constantly under stress. I was always in fight or flight mode because of all of the people in my life that were doing shitty things to me or just completely ignoring that I had feelings to begin with. Like I had to see my mom even get slapped by my grandmother and in some weird fight, and I was just like, I don't want to be a part of this. I'm going to go outside now. And like they were sitting there doing this in front of me, and I'm just like, child, here. I'm a child. Okay, bye. Like, don't freaking do that in front of children. I am so tired of people putting children in the middle of things, in the middle of adults shit. And that is further trauma for the child to work out.
Mm-hmm.
With finding out being autistic and learning how to kind of become more aware of feelings and the PTSD symptoms, starting to learn where my triggers were. Not having anxiety medication for a long time was like preventing me from like furthering my healing. So once I got on
Mm-hmm.
anti-anxiety medication and also having chronic illness, that's another whole mixed bag of trauma. Learning to become a disabled person, I started just realizing how to respond even to other people. Like realizing that, oh, and I'm an impulsive person, and if another person is being impulsive, then I don't need to react poorly to them because they're having a moment. And so I think that's where me and my grandmother were always in a feedback loop of yelling and anger and throwing things and slamming because it was just like I was having issues and I couldn't be aware of what she was going through. So it was like just a feedback loop of like anger constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So being on social media a lot too, like that's not very healthy. I learned how to not like engage too much with people if I start to feel out of control. Like I try not to really
Mm-hmm.
let other people's reactions to things elicit poor reactions from myself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't always like accomplish that, but it's gotten better. The other thing that I realize, but especially as an autistic person, is learning your stems. What sensory input feels best to you? Like what can you do to regulate your body when you're feeling a little out of control? So I it was like especially over the pandemic, I was constantly buying like fidget toys, just like really trying to figure out what I like, what feels good in the moment for certain things, and what tools can I put in my toolbox. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I probably could just like do a video on all my reviews of like fidget toys because
Yeah.
I have so many of them.
That's actually a good idea. I think you absolutely should, and that should be an episode. um,
Even for people with that are not autistic or neurodivergent, we all stim. So it's really good to find some sort of fidget or some sort of activity that really helps regulate your emotions, especially if you're feeling
mhm,
overwhelmed by emotions. Let me just talk really quick about a couple of the symptoms that I have from having PTSD. So I have dermatillomania, which is skin picking. I don't know if you've heard of that.
mhm,
Typically, like I'm always picking at my the skin around my fingers. I'm picking at my face. Like that's not healthy. Also, the other thing is my OCD and agoraphobia. Like over the pandemic, I've gotten really agoraphobic. Like it's really hard for me to leave my house. I get terrified even going to work sometimes because of. So I decided that because my therapist is just more of a talk therapist, so I got this book. And these are different types of therapies, and I wanted to learn more about them so that I could figure out what would work best for me. So I got this one. Has lots of different types of therapy: CBT, DBT, ACT. It teaches you how to relax your vagus nerve because your vagus nerve can get really, when you're really anxious, it can get really sensitive, and that can lead to feeling like you're going to pass out, stuff like that. EMDR, which I'm extremely interested in learning about, that has a lot of evidence of
mhm.
behind it. And everybody that I've talked to that has done that therapy, they said that they really had lessened their PTSD symptoms. So I'm really excited to do that. There's also somatic psychotherapy, which I don't know much about, so I'm still reading this book. Even if you can't get a therapist, getting stuff like this can really help you. And I also found these books. They're notebooks. I don't know if you can see.
Oh yeah, I know those. I have one.
Um,
The from like therapists, right? They're like
yeah, ther-
journals. Mm-hmm.
it's called Therapy Notebooks, and I've been looking through it a little bit, but I haven't used it yet. I got the After Trauma Notebook. So they have like ones for anxiety, ones to like if you want to break bad habits and form better habits. They have one for
Mm-hmm.
that. They have depression ones, like all sorts of ones. I hope to use this and then do kind of like a video about how it went for me. So those are some of the tools that I've put in my arsenal to kind of just, I don't know, help. uh,
Yeah, that's awesome.
and everybody is different, so it's just like you got to find the tools that work best for you. I
Mm-hmm.
can always like say what works best for me, but I can never say like, oh, you have to try this because I know it will work for
Mm-hmm.
you. Like you just have to like it's trial and error with everything. I feel like.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I definitely like have tried journaling, and I traditional, this is like very interesting for me to find out as of late, but traditional journaling is very hard for me because my head is not linear. Like my head, because I have not been like diagnosed technically as ADHD, but like my therapist said, I strongly believe you have ADHD, and I was like, okay. And she's like going through that process, like diagnosed process, is like very like a lot of therapists have their opinions on whether that it's accurate or not.
mhm.
But she's like, I strongly believe you have those symptoms, like all the symptoms, like you match every single one of them. And I'm very sensitive to sound, so like and
Mm,
smells, and I'm
me
also very
too.
sensitive to like how clothes feel.
Are you
So
sure you're
I
not
feel like
autistic?
I don't know. Maybe I can't wear certain clothes for a long time. Like I will literally crawl out of like I just literally cannot. Like I immediately I have to like come home. I have to just drive home and like change into something else, or I will like I feel like I will die.
I'm the
Maybe
same
I will
way.
just
You
like
can have
I'll
both
wear
though.
something and
You can have both
yeah.
autism and ADHD.
What do we know? We found something new today. But yeah, like that's something that is like really like that's why I always have noise canceling headphones, and like last week I didn't have them, and I like almost went into like a spiral panic attack because I was
Aw.
like I could hear everything, and I was like I'm definitely gonna die today. Like, definitely not making it today. But yeah, so I always have my headphones in, even at home, and people have to like, even at home, like people text me or they like raise their hand to like, we like raise each other's hand. Like I raise my hand to talk, they raise their hand because like we have headphones if there's something that we want to talk, because those are just like safeguards that I've just asked other people to do for me because
Oh.
I can't handle it. Like I can't handle the noise, I can't handle the smells, I can't handle like cloth and shit like that. Um, and my point was that I forgot my point now. See where this is all bouncing around, but I totally like understand like where you're at with like oh the journaling. Linear journaling doesn't work because my brain is not linear, and I figured out like I got a blank piece of paper and I just started journaling random things in different parts of the paper. Like it's like a giant paper, and I just started like writing random things. And at the end of the day, after I was done with that page, I realized like maybe while I love the template of regular journaling, like it doesn't work for me because it's all like one question, then next question, then next question. What I
Hmm.
need is like a way to empty my brain onto a paper where I see it and my
Yeah.
brain is like patchwork. It's not like one, two, three,
Hmm.
four. So yes, to your point, I think if one thing works and you feel like journaling like or something that is like traditional ways of like dealing or coping does not work for you, like try it the same way but in your own way. Like
Yeah.
how if you were to make a like a therapy notebook, what does that look like? And like just do it on a blank paper, and that's really helped
Yeah.
me a lot.
That's why I was interested in these ones because they give you prompts instead of like it's just a page and then you have to put your thoughts onto it like that. Like I like having
Yeah.
prompts, something to like focus on. It's like, okay, what do I feel about this thing? And like so if it gives me like a question or something to focus on, I feel like I can deal with it better than I mean I used to journal all the time when I was younger. Like I would just get blank notebook papers, especially like sketchbooks because I was always doodling. So I
Mhm.
just turned my sketchbook into a journaling notebook, and if you look at them, they look like a crazy person wrote in it
Mhm.
because I'm the same way. Like sometimes I can't just write straight down the page. Like I'll like do something over here and then have another thought and then do something over here and then draw something or just repeat a word over and over and over again. Like there's probably many pages in one of my high school notebooks that just say "fuck you" over and over again because that's what I was feeling. It's just like no matter what I
Mhm.
was feeling, it was like okay, if it's just a word that I'm thinking of, I'm gonna write it down. Like that's how I would do
Mhm.
it instead of like because I couldn't just sit there and go, "Dear diary, today blah blah blah." Like I tried doing that kind of style, and I always fell off of it.
Yeah, I agree. Like it's like whatever keeps you constant and whatever keeps you going back to the thing that's going to help you with like your healing journey is, I believe, like the right thing for you. And I think that's the biggest thing about like healing journey is that like I think just hearing other people talk about like what they have done just gives you like you said, like more tools in your toolbox to try those things out. And if those don't work, then like you learn more things and figure out if those things work for you. It's all kind of like trial and error, as you like previously mentioned. I think the important thing is like you do try them, and that like you know move forward. And Even if it's like one step forward and three steps back, like you still took a step forward. And I think that's what's important. And I
Yeah,
think that's like how you also have come to all these adversities, but like you've overcome and you're so resilient for like coming far, into like, and now helping other people.
yeah. I mean, it's weird because I've always wanted to be a teacher. I mean, I am now. Um, and I'd always wanted to have that job. I just now that I do, and I don't have regret that I didn't start it prior because I don't think I could have been the best teacher because I was everything I was going through. I feel like now that I have a better handle on even just myself and my own responses to things, I can help children a lot better than I think I could have in my early 20s. I was a full-on mess. Even though I wish that my body was a little bit more cooperative and I could work full time in a classroom, but at least I'm doing it now, and it's really satisfying. Yeah, and then I never like expected to use my own trauma to like help people, but learning from others who have been through shit like has always kind of helped me heal a little bit. Like here's one other trauma thing. This is the only other trauma thing that I'm going to talk about and then we can wrap it up. So when I was 15, two girls who were sisters were murdered by a serial killer. There were three girls in total in my small hometown that were killed in '96, the end of '96, and then May of '97. I knew them through other girls that went to their high school and that were on my softball team, and they came to our show or our games and stuff. And so after that happened, sometimes take a really long time to process shit. And if I don't know how to properly react, my brain just shuts down. And I became obsessed with serial killers because I wanted to know the psychology behind it, which in turn got me into psychology in general and just learning more about how other people's brains work. I'm obsessed with human behavior and patterns, and so it always confused me like, why would these people do this to others? And I started hearing Kara Robinson Chamberlain. She survived that serial killer. And through her stories, it actually helped me heal from losing them. It's kind of amazing, like just listening to other. I mean, it sucks that we've all gone through some really horrible things, um, but we all kind of have the same types of symptoms. We can all relate to how PTSD hits us. Um,
Mm,
and so we can be there for each other, even if we've gone through difficult things and they're all different. Like, I never want to compare, like, trauma stories. Like, I never want to do well, my story is worse than yours. Or I don't want to have someone be like, well, I don't want to talk about my trauma because it's not as bad as some other people. No, you still went through
mm,
something, it still matters.
right.
We don't
Like
need
no
it.
trauma Olympics, and it's
Yeah.
obviously, yeah, like whatever you went through, like that's your story, and like that's what made you into the person you are now. And either way, like as you said, like those sort of like symptoms of whatever you went through, um, have kind of like left those like scars, whether like shallow or deep, like those are like your scars to own, and like those are things that like you have to live with for the rest of your life. And how you live with them is like up to you, but obviously like through hopefully this podcast and listening to other people's stories, like everybody can like relate a little bit and learn a little bit and like be there and create like a community that can like be very supportive of each
Yeah, and I
other.
just also want more people to be empathetic towards those who have had trauma. Um, because like my family is not like I said before, they're always the type of people to be like, well, why worry about it? Just move on. It's like you
Mm-hmm.
can't do that. You have to unpack it in order to heal. Because if you keep just shoving things down, you're gonna explode. And that
Yeah.
did happen to me. And I went through, um, sorry to back up just a little bit, but After my worst year in like my senior year, I spent a couple of years doing drugs.
Mm,
I had never done them before, and I haven't done any hard drugs really since that. I mean, weed is the only thing I do. Um, so 19 to about 21, I was experimenting because in my mind, I was like, my life sucks. I don't care if I die. I'm not going to attempt, but which I did attempt at 19. I don't want to talk about it. That's why I didn't. Sorry. Yeah, I did attempt at 19, but after that attempt, I was doing the whole like, well, I'm just lazy, so I'm gonna like drink and do pills and hope that something bad happens. And I had someone look at me and be like, I didn't think you were gonna turn out like your mother. And that
mm-hmm,
really hit me hard. I was like, oh, yeah, yeah, I don't want to do that. So I stopped. So yeah, like again, if you don't have the right support and you're not able to heal on your own, because some people take a long time to start unpacking that shit, you can fucking explode, whether it's on yourself, other people. Like we're not we're not meant to hold everything in.
mm-hmm,
I think it's damaging to hold everything in. I don't understand why people don't want to talk about hard things. Like it is difficult to talk about difficult things, but it still needs to be done.
mm-hmm. So like, yeah, I agree absolutely. Like I think like everybody in their own time, but hopefully everybody realizes that in their own time, like it is very important to like talk things through because like if you don't, there are severe like I mean, it's also like science. Like if you have a lot of stress and your mentally or bodily stress is like not resolved, like you do get like other things like cysts in your body or things like that that like it physically shows up if like even if you're mentally under distress and our body has chemicals that shows
Yep.
that like your body changes when you're under like extreme stress
Mhm.
and so I think it's definitely more like definitely important to like talk through what you are going through when you are ready.
Yeah, and so yeah, that's what this podcast is supposed to accomplish, just having conversations with each other and just being there for each other, giving space to process and talk about their trauma and healing. Um, and you don't even have to be on your healing journey yet. You could just talk about your trauma. Like everybody takes their time and like you can't
Mhm.
force someone to go get help. um, but what I can do for people is just to give them resources, give them my ear, um, and yeah, that's what I want to do.
That's awesome.
That is us
Well,
healing together.
perfect wrap up. Perfect wrap up. Well,
um,
thank you for talking to me and sharing all of those things because I cannot imagine it being like an easy story to tell, regardless of like if you have told it previously. So I really appreciate this time with you, and hopefully
yeah.
you all have also enjoyed this time and learned a thing or two.
Yeah, and I am a streamer on Twitch. I go by the name Great Catsby, and all that will be linked down below. And I'm going to link Salty's handles as well, so you can go follow her. She's on Twitch too, and amazing. And she was
Thank
one of the
you.
first people I found on Twitch, like what, almost 3 years ago.
Really? Is
I
that right?
feel, or 2 years. I think maybe it's 2 years. I have no idea.
Really? I didn't know that.
The time is like weird since the pandemic.
Yeah.